White Plains, New York. And it was by a lake you may have heard of in New York State called Lake Champlain. Anybody ever heard of that lake? Lake Champlain? It's a pretty common lake in New York. Right here. Where am I at? Lake Champlain. It's a big time lake in New York. Okay? Now, that's going to take us to another thought. But what was the negative thing about this subtopic for the American colonists? What's the negative thing? We were kind of lucky, but what, in essence, what did we lose? New York Harbor. Yeah, we lost the harbor. So when we retreated out, the British commanded New York City and its splendid harbor. So if you're the British now, what's your goal? What?
Keep the New York harbor.
Yeah, but what's your goal? Because you don't want this war to last very long. Pursue the Continental Army. Right now they're by Lake Champlain. That takes us to our next subtopic, which is the British advance from Quebec.
Canada?
Yep. Now if you look at Lake Champlain on that map, is it kind of close to Canada? And so what's going to happen is you're going to have the British advance down from the north to try to attack Washington's Continental Army at Lake Champlain. And again, if they can win, they'll end the Revolutionary War. So, in the fall of 1776, the British Navy will advance from Quebec, which is in Canada, with the goal to attack General Washington's Continental Army at White Plains, New York, and a victory over the Americans there would finish them off once and for all, and the Revolutionary War would come to an end. Okay, so that's what the British are planning on doing. Now, this might ring a bell for one or two of you in here. The only thing that really stood in the British Navy's way between Quebec and engaging Washington at White Plains was Benedict Arnold. And Benedict Arnold was a good guy there at that time, and he was stationed at Fort Ticonderoga, which was close to Lake Champlain. So the only thing that stood in the British Navy's way on their march from Quebec to White Plains was a fellow by the name of Benedict Arnold, who was stationed at Fort Ticonderoga, which was on Lake Champlain. He's the only thing that's going to keep Washington from being attacked. So, now I got to tell you a little bit about the rules of war in these days. The British had some really strong traditions, and one of them was that you fought like a gentleman and you didn't fight during the winter. So this is the fall of 1776, and what Benedict Arnold's trying to do here is he's going to put a naval blockade on Lake Champlain so that the British cannot get to White Plains and obviously cannot engage the Continental Army. Okay, you know what a naval blockade is? We'll talk a bunch about that when we get to the Cuban Missile Crisis next year. What's a naval blockade, Kyra? What's that? Naval blockade. I'm going to give you a textbook blockade of me. What am I going to do? I'm going to stack a bunch of textbooks right here, so I'm blocking you to get to me. A naval blockade of Lake Champlain would be Arnold would take a bunch of ships and have a naval blockade. He would block entrance into Lake Champlain from the north with ships, right? Problem was, he didn't have any. So he took 800 men and they built 15 ships in 3 months. They built 15 ships in 3 months. Didn't have any ships, so they had to build them.
How many men?
800 men. And Benedict Arnold built 15 ships in 3 months. And they are going to blockade Lake Champlain with those ships. Now, their goal isn't going to be to win a battle with the British. What are they doing that Sterling did? Buying time. Okay? And Arnold's strategy was to string out the fight and keep the enemy away from advancing to General Washington until what? Winter came and they quit fighting until spring. This is crucial because if they get to White Plains and defeat Washington before winter, the war's over. If Washington can hold out and regroup, he will live to fight a day in the spring, and will continue this fight for independence. So, Arnold sails his 15 ships behind Valcour Island, which is an island in Lake Champlain, in that area. He gets his boats behind him, hides them, waiting for what? The British ships to come so he can ambush them. So, Arnold sails his 15 ships behind Valcour Island in Lake Champlain, and he waits in ambush for those British ships. Well, they come. And at high noon, on October 11th, 1776, the British Navy arrived and the battle began. So at noon on October 11th, 1776, the British Navy arrived and the battle began. By the time this thing, and it was like a one-day battle, by dusk on the 11th, Arnold had lost every one of his ships and a third of his men. So they fought like the Dickens for a full day, dawn till dusk. And in that period of time, Arnold lost every one of his ships and a third of his men. And the rest were able to kind of slip past the British boats in the darkness of night and get away. But even though he got his butt kicked to a point and lost every one of his ships, what he did is he stalled the British Navy into winter. So right after this battle, they considered it winter, and the British withdrew back to Quebec, and instead of advancing to Washington, the American troops at White Plains. So he accomplished his goal. He had stalled the British Navy into winter. The British withdrew back to Quebec, and they will not fight until spring. So what Arnold did, before he eventually betrayed his country, is he brought his countrymen another season to fight and hopefully win their battle for independence. Because if they get beat then, they're done. And the Revolutionary War is over, and we're back to British rule, and we're probably not sitting in here talking about it today, to be quite honest with you. So, I'm going to show you this little strategy on the part of Benedict Arnold here, and then we're going to close for the day with a couple of comments about where we're going as far as Washington and the Continental Army are concerned. So while you're up, Nick, if you could get the light and the door, that would be great.